Happy Halloween and welcome to I Have Issues, a comic book show where I talk about comic book related subjects that have pissed me off or annoy me to some degree. Now, today's going to be a bit strange because I actually haven't finished the comic I read for today's episode. But that is my biggest complaint. Let's start talking about Blade.
Blade is a character I think most of you would have heard about at this point. He's the guy who's half human and half vampire, and also hunts vampires. There was a movie trilogy featuring the character back before comic book movies were good, and now that the majority of them are good, with a few exceptions, he's getting a reboot with a new Blade movie coming out in the future. That's really all I know about Blade, and after looking up stuff about the character and reading this one comic I have featuring him, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot besides that. From what I looked up, if the Wikipedia entry can be trusted, Blade hasn't had a solo series since the 1990s. Sure, he's made an appearance in other books like Ghost Rider and The Defenders, and had the odd miniseries here and there, but as far as a solo Blade book, to my knowledge there isn't one, and there hasn't been one for almost 30 years. A few creators at Marvel have stated that they've been working on a new Blade book, but from what I've read, that was back in 2015, and it has been delayed indefinitely. Now, I'd normally complain about that. A story about a sword-wielding badass that goes around killing vampires who also has to deal with being half vampire sounds like a good idea. Escalating threats of vampires, maybe some other classic monsters like zombies and werewolves thrown in, maybe doing what the movies did with the whole vampire culture that Blade has to go up against as the overarching villains of his series, and issues dedicated to trying to hold on whatever humanity he's got left to work in some character building. Hell, if I was writing this, I'd probably take a page or two from the early days of shows like Supernatural. Groups of hunters going around fighting things like vampires, and Blade's just one of them, who just happens to be better at it than most thanks to his vampiric heritage. That sounds like a strong basis for a series, as long as you don't go too supernatural with it to the point that it becomes as fucking ridiculous as that show is. So then why isn't there a Blade series? And what did I mean at the start when I said that I didn't finish the Blade comic I picked up? Well, I don't know if everyone else had the same experience, but in my case, it was just really fucking boring. I don't know if it had to do with the style of writing at the time, if it's just bad writing in general, or if it's the shifting tones that just throw the whole story off, but either way, the comic was just too boring to keep reading. When I sit down to read and start counting how many pages I've got left to suffer through, that's a problem. Granted, that might be more on me. I have a tough time getting into older books. The style of writing is different compared to modern stories in a way that feels overly dense and needlessly long to pad things out. I don't know what that says about me, but it's what I took away from the Blade comic I was reading. It also didn't help that the tone and story were so different. The book I have is a collection of Blade comics, some from a mini-series and some standalones, and it opens with a tie into the original Blade movie. Then it shifts to a mini-series with Blade in the South hunting vampires in New Orleans. The art style, character design, overall premise, and even the character all change between those issues too. In the movie tie-in, it's the Blade I mentioned above, half vampire, half human, using his skills and abilities to hunt vampires. In the other series, the designs are all different. Being half vampire just seems to be a thing Blade is rather than a problem he has to deal with, and he doesn't even carry a fucking sword. The miniseries has Blade fighting with a really sharp piece of wood that he's etched holy symbols from every faith on Earth into. Don't get me wrong, that's kinda cool, but it's also a really weird change for the guy named after the fucking weapon he fights with. All of this just kind of rolled into a boring slog that I was all too happy to put down and be done with. Maybe something will come of that new series Marvel was planning on doing, but I highly doubt it. Or hell, maybe when the movie comes out, it'll generate enough interest in the character to get the series moving again. Fingers crossed, I guess.
And that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, I hope you have yourselves a fantastic day, and I'll see you then.